Hi, I am Butters, and this is an update on the side game I've started working on to keep me from getting bored with The Abandoned. The game is a beat 'em up with only one level, which I haven't done yet. In it, you move forward, fighting against waves of enemies until you reach the end of the level and beat the boss. The game's story follows a young musician fighting off soul-stealing businessmen trying to take advantage of her before she can get a big break. I don't have a name for this game yet, so I'm just going to keep calling it this game, but this game is based off Streets of Rage, which means I need to figure out how to do the physics for Streets of Rage. Because the game is at an isometric angle, the player can walk in two dimensions, up and down and left and right, but they are blocked by the camera borders. When the player moves to the right, the camera will follow until they reach a checkpoint where the camera will stay put until the current wave of enemies is finished. If the player tries to leave the camera, they will be teleported back to where they were standing and not allowed to move in that direction anymore. So if the player tries to move out of the left edge of the camera, they will be teleported back to where they were standing and not allowed to move left until they move some other direction again. And thank you Cyber Potato for your Mario tutorial where I borrowed most of the camera mechanics. The video should be in the description. Right now, the player can only do a basic attack, but eventually they will be able to do combos and aerial attacks. Still, the player fills their special meter a little whenever they attack an enemy, but I haven't done the HUD yet, so you can only see how much the special meter is filled down here. When the special meter is filled, the player will be able to do a special attack, which will do massive damage to every enemy. Lastly, the jump was interesting for me to make because in my other games I just have gravity push against the player so they stick to the ground, but that wouldn't really work in this one. So instead, I added a variable to the player so the game can know when it's on the ground. When the player is not considered on the ground, this variable is false, turning gravity on for the player, and movement is taken away from the player as a jump force is applied. This makes the player quickly move up, but gravity will counteract it and start pulling them back down. Now to make the jump work, the player's collision with the platform is turned off so they don't hit the top area and ruin the jump. A timer is also started when the player presses jump, set to turn off the moment that the player reaches the same height as when they started. When the timer ends, it sets the variable false, turning off gravity, fixing the player's collision, and giving the player control of their character back. There are checkpoints spread throughout the level, which will tell the game where the player is and start fights. When in a fight, the camera will start moving, and a wave of enemies will spawn to attack the player. When the enemies are defeated, the camera can move again. There are also holes spread throughout the level. The player is considered falling. If they are over a hole, the player will fall for a second before teleporting above the map over their last checkpoint. When the player hits the ground, it will slightly damage every active enemy. Finally, for the props, there are boxes spread around the level that when hit by the player, have a chance of dropping health. I have 3 enemies done so far. First is the basic puncher. The basic enemy has 3 ways to walk around, and will pick them semi-randomly. These movement types are a wander, an evade, and an engage. The wander movement type has a 3 out of 12 chance of being chosen, or if 2 other enemies are attacking the player, it has a 1 out of 2 chance. The wander movement type is also used if the evading type is activated 3 times in a row. While wandering, the enemy will find a random point on the screen and move to it before waiting a bit to move again. When the player is not being attacked by multiple enemies, the basic can choose to engage the player. The engage move has a 6 out of 12 chance of being picked, or if the enemy is close enough to the player, it will engage no matter what. When engaging, the enemy will move towards the player, and when within range, it will stop and attack the player. The next enemy is the Tripper. The Tripper has all the same movement types as the basic, but when engaged, it moves farther away before quickly closing the distance and tripping the player. When tripped, the player won't be able to do anything for a second, will be vulnerable, and will lose any upgrades that they have. The Tripper enemy is also a little bit slower and weaker than the basic, but has a bit more health. The last enemy so far is a shooter. The shooters have the same wandering code as the other 2, but when engaging, the shooter will line up much farther away from the player than the others before shooting 4 shots at the player. After engaging, the shooter will run into a corner of the screen to prepare for another attack. The shooter is a bit quicker than the basic and a little bit weaker. There will be more videos about this unnamed game that I'm working on, but the next one will probably be about The Abandoned since that's the main thing and I'm actually getting excited to work on it again. But in the next Abandoned video, there will at least be some cool things in it, as long as nothing goes horribly wrong. So we're just gonna have to wait and see. Anyways, thank you for watching. Love you. Bye bye.